Whiplash is a cinematic masterpiece that takes you through the inner journey of a musician. It's a film that I've loved ever since I first laid my eyes on it, if you couldn't tell already by my use of it in a number of FSM projects. It captures the inner turmoil one faces when striving for greatness in any creative field, while also asking the question, is it worth it? One way Whiplash does this is by referencing musicians who are very great, but at a great cost. Another is by showing the toll that becoming great takes on Neiman's personal life as well. I first saw this movie in 2017, just a few months before I myself would audition for the jazz program at WestConn. However, I will further elaborate on that story in the next video that I release. When one decides to be a musician, or partake in any creative field for that matter, there is the contrast of the legendary artists before us who came from nowhere and created masterpieces that are still admired centuries or even millennia on the one hand, and people around us telling us to be practical and get a real job on the other. What Whiplash accurately captures is the pressure a musician must live up to from their idols, their instructors, their peers, and themselves. In the process of self-actualization, one decides that security alone is not enough to have a fulfilling life. One may even have contempt for such a lifestyle, hence the starving artist myth. Neiman is pushed to the brink of his limits in the pursuit of his dream of becoming one of the greats.
I want to be one of the greats.
Although Whiplash has its shortcomings in terms of accuracy in regard to jazz terminology,
it was okay.
It was okay? Mm-hmm. You were okay. We were kick-ass.
I am making the argument that it is incredibly accurate in terms of the inner life of a musician and creatives alike. What happened, as my English teacher from high school would say. The fundamental question of Whiplash is it worth it to be an artist? This is a question that every creative person, myself included, has had to face. Is it worth it to overcome all the internal and external sources of doubt in the pursuit of something you know to be great? This, of course, means different things to different people. To Neiman's father, being a writing teacher to high school students provides meaning. To Neiman, becoming the greatest jazz drummer of his generation is a source of meaning. Most commentaries of Whiplash view Fletcher as an external force. However, I'm going to make the case that Fletcher is an internal voice that a musician experiences through their pursuit of greatness. Fletcher represents all the mind tricks that a musician will also go through in their careers, both from within and without. I'll also make the case that Fletcher is actually secretly rooting for Neiman the whole time. Much like our egos. We all have our dreams and ideals, what we imagine to be in our lives and careers, and then there is the unexpected smack in the face when we realize just how naive we were. It is not uncommon for a goal to be 2 times, 5 times, or even 10 times more difficult, frustrating, and time-consuming than we had initially anticipated. Perhaps it does not explicitly manifest in throwing a chair at someone's head, but anytime you have a vision and are trying to work with others, there can be a voice that wants to scream in a fit of rage when the micromanaging just isn't working. Neiman is a college student who aspires to be great. One of the greats, in fact. Fletcher appeals to Neiman's ego, building him up and breaking him down. Fletcher plays a relentless series of mind tricks on Neiman from the very first time we see him to the very last scene. In the very beginning, Neiman is playing drums, and Fletcher walks in on him playing. He asks him to play double-time swing. Dissatisfied, he takes off. Fletcher embodies the total opposite of today's PC attitudes. He does not give participation trophies. In fact, his command over his jazz band is quite militaristic in a number of ways, such as making Neiman arrive earlier than he actually has to, as well as physically and verbally abusing him. Upon first meeting Fletcher, Neiman is so intimidated by Fletcher's presence, he stops playing the drums. He also refers to him as yes sir and no sir, showing that Fletcher is in a position of authority. Fletcher then leaves, leaving Neiman the impression that he's fucked up and missed his shot. Fletcher comes back after he hears that Neiman has improved his playing. From this inner perspective, when we reach a state of competence, the ego can come with it through the back door. It can even come through the form of insulting others that we perceive to be inferior or less skilled than ourselves.
Well, you're in the first chair. Let's see if it's just because you're cute. 3, 4. Yep, that's fine.
Neiman is accepted to play in Fletcher's band, albeit as an alternate, but this gives him the balls to ask out Nicole. Fletcher tells Neiman to arrive earlier than he has to. Neiman thinks that he's arrived late. However, this request was just a Jedi mind trick from Fletcher. Fletcher is very demanding and abusive to the other students. During the break, Fletcher tells Neiman to just relax and play with the band. Fletcher gets in the head of Neiman and uses this information to humiliate him later. So far, Fletcher has built his ego up, got him in the band, but will proceed to tear him down. If Fletcher was brutal to the other students, Neiman shouldn't be surprised when Fletcher behaves in the same way towards him when he makes a mistake, especially given the fact that he is a newbie in the group. This shot makes Neiman look more powerful as the angle is shot up, looking up at him compared to the previous shots where he looks intimidated. And of course, the famous scene where Fletcher tosses a chair at him. And this may seem absurd, an obscene overreaction to drum playing that was pretty much on time. However, this is not as far-fetched as you may think when playing with other musicians. With one band I was in, the vocalist had a similar reaction to the drummer, who said that he was not on time. His reaction was to scream at the drummer, slam the door, and go to his room in a fit of rage. I asked if this happens often to the drummer and bass player, and they said yes. We had to wait 15 minutes or so before bringing him back to practice after he'd calmed down. Part of why I love Whiplash so much is that I had an instructor who other students perceived to be a very mild version of Fletcher. Although this depiction of Fletcher is of course an exaggeration, after all it is a movie, I did have an instructor who did have some militaristic tendencies, self-admitted hard ass. He also expected students to go through the material, practice, and develop proficiency. In other words, he expected students to actually give a shit. I told some of my peers I liked the instructor when auditioning for him in the music department in high school, and they thought that he was kind of harsh. But then in class I was laughing my ass off, and everyone started to get a sense of humor. I had very blonde hair at the time and a high-pitched laugh, so he would tease me and call me the smiling Aryan.
I'm not gonna have you cost us a competition because your mind's on a fucking Happy Meal instead of on pitch.
You give a calculator to a fucking retard, he's gonna try to turn on a TV with me.
Not much has changed, as you can see. He recently moved, and a lot of his students showed up to see him play and say goodbye. I don't imagine this would happen with Fletcher if he moved. Although Fletcher's depiction of a college instructor is harsh, there are some cases of instructors behaving this way. For instance, a dance teacher I know told me that at one institution, an instructor would take out a lighter and have the dancers fling their leg over it. And you may object and think, this is horrible, there's no reason to treat anybody like this. But this is a factor that musicians face in regard to their careers. Like Fletcher, from the surface, we see a mentor of young talent, but for those who actually work with him, he is a tyrant. Similarly, the music business, at the surface, glorifies fame and creativity, partying, but has a completely different reality for those who've worked within it. Most of the people I've met who've had any experience in the music business, even had relative success, have said that the music business sucks. As 50 Cent once said, the music business was more brutal than anything he had experienced, slinging crack.
The music business plays this Jedi mind trick on you, where the whole thing's set up to be rapacious and take advantage of your weakness. And the system I was in was, even if you were successful, it was set up to make you feel like you weren't successful.
Right.
Because that was the work, that was the manipulation.
Yeah.
I once said to somebody who was a very famous name in the business, it's like you guys find a needle in the haystack and then you spend the next 20 years telling them they're not a needle in the haystack.
Right.
What I'm trying to say, and I'm not saying it well, is you would think you would be surrounded by people who are telling you, you're talented, you're special, we want to help you because the more you succeed, we'll succeed and we'll all succeed together. It was the exact opposite. It was like, no, you're dumb, you're wrong, no, you're crazy, don't do that, you're going to ruin it. And even if you'd say, I want to wear this hat, okay, I'm going to wear this hat. And when it wouldn't work, they'd say, see, you should have listened to us.
Is that universal? Have you heard other musicians say the same thing?
I would guess it was universal, because looking back, it doesn't feel personal to me. It felt like I use your bad analogy, pimp ho, I don't know.
Right.
It's a weird con job thing. That was my experience. There's a lot of con jobs.
As Whiplash shows, there are a number of obstacles and Jedi mind tricks that get in the way of one's dream. Neiman is made to believe that he is the needle in a haystack by being accepted into Fletcher's band. But then Fletcher plays Jedi mind tricks by triangulating him against Tenor, the other drummer. He is then verbally and physically abused for not being on time.
Not quite my tempo.
Neiman is humiliated, and the camera switches to a wide shot, making him look small, followed by the shot of a Buddy Rich quote, "If you don't have the ability, you wind up playing in a rock band," which was placed to emphasize his lack of confidence in his ability as a drummer. Although there are a great deal of technical rock and metal drummers such as Neil Peart, Dave Portnoy, Sean Reinhart, Gar Samuelson, and I could go on and on, a rock drummer could get away with the usual cliches in comparison to the more intricate syncopated patterns of jazz and fusion. In fact, it should be noted that Sean Reinhart, who played the drums on Human by Death, was influenced by Chick Corea, among other jazz drummers. It's not uncommon to find jazz influence among the greatest rock and metal drummers, and the same goes for guitar players as well. Although Fletcher is brutal to Neiman, you can also make the case that he is secretly rooting for him. For instance, in Fletcher's triangulation of Neiman against Tenor, it is theorized that Fletcher took the folder in this scene. How else could it have been lost? It should also be noted that Fletcher is being a smartass as usual. He does not at all seem upset with Tenor. Fletcher took the folder for Neiman to succeed, and for Tenor to feel at fault. Fletcher also later tells Neiman that he became the core drummer because you lost the folder, which is additional circumstantial evidence that Fletcher took the folder. Neiman plays the competition instead of Tenor and becomes the new core. Neiman's playing is fucking phenomenal. The whole band sounds great. However, this is still not good enough for Fletcher. So he brings an Irish leprechaun as a competitive edge to piss Neiman off and give him even more drive. Fletcher later admits that this was just to make that Dago jealous, getting all pissed off and butthurt about how sloppy that Irish leprechaun is. Although it would be extremely unethical to do this, there is comparison between players and bands, especially when they have former members. When I went to art school, there was a student who admitted that my sweeping ability had motivated him to get his chops up because he wanted to beat me. And there is no beating me, because I'm just grooving to the chord changes now, man. Besides, I'm not about the sweeping anymore. It's all about the economy picking. Although this was playful, it does go to show that there is some competition between players who want the approval of an instructor, an audience, the opposite sex, whatever you're into, etc. Neiman is upset that Fletcher would choose this noob over him, but then Fletcher receives a phone call that a student has died. Neiman, oblivious to the situation, demands to know what's going on, and Fletcher tells him that he must earn the part. And this means that he must make even more of a commitment, so he breaks up with Nicole. He has now internalized Fletcher's view of reality. All that matters is being a great drummer. From the beginning, it's clear that she doesn't have the same level of ambition that he does. Nicole hasn't done anything to Neiman, and she may have even become a great girlfriend. However, there are certainly cases where musicianship may cause conflict in a relationship, either because the musician is not contributing financially, or it becomes more of a priority than the relationship, which of course can cause problems. Nothing will stop Neiman from becoming one of the greats. A friend of mine who plays piano, when he saw this clip, he said, "When you've had enough of music." The Whiplash scene, of course, depicts Neiman's level of commitment to being one of the greats, to the point where it nearly kills him. Neiman is about to play in a competition, but forgot his drumsticks at the rental car. This is where the musician in me and the filmmaker in me clash a bit. Of course, to get all nitpicky, there's no reason why the other drummers couldn't have just let him use their sticks, but from a cinematic perspective, this is of course necessary for the story. If he had the sticks, he would have just killed and slaughtered the competition, and there wouldn't be much tension. Alternatively, Neiman could have just let Connolly play the part, but his ego got the best of him, and so he got in a car crash while rushing. Get it? rushing to the competition. So Neiman goes to play, and he's bleeding. And it's pretty amazing drumming considering the circumstances, and point out that why did nobody in the room ask why he's bleeding to try and get medical help? But unlike CinemaSins, I don't hate movies. Neiman is struggling to play, and Fletcher tells him, "You're done." Fed up, Neiman tackles him. Neiman is then told by a guidance counselor that the student really died not from a car crash, but suicide. Neiman tells them how Fletcher has treated him, presumably, and Fletcher loses his position as an instructor. Neiman takes down all his posters, presumably throws them out, briefly lives a normie life working at a sandwich shop. This may be a hot take, but I would argue this is where Whiplash has the structure of a comedy. In a comedy, there is harmony, conflict, failure, or betrayal, and then resolution. Aside from Fletcher making me laugh my ass off, of course.
I can still fucking see you, Mini-Me!
So Neiman is living a relatively normal existence until he sees Fletcher playing at a local bar. Pre-social media, of course, because Fletcher would have been canceled for his colorful sense of humor today.
And here comes Mr. Gay Pride of the Upper West Side himself. Unfortunately, this is not a Bette Midler concert. We will not be serving cosmopolitans in baked Alaska, so just play faster than you give fucking handjobs, will you please?
Even more so than the ritualistic beatings of his pupils. Neiman is a straight white male, after all, so that's perfectly acceptable. Fletcher plays piano, which explains why he's such an asshole to Neiman. Fletcher lays down some chill chords, but certainly not shitting perfect 400s.
Oh my god, are you serious? That shit?
Before Neiman has the chance to leave, Fletcher says, "Andrew," and I believe this is the only time where he refers to him by his first name, and not the mispronunciation of his last name that I'm happily using. It is in this scene where we see the villain explaining his philosophy.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Which is essentially that in order to become one of the greats, students have to go beyond what is expected of them. And this part is true. If you want to have a career in music or a creative field, learning the material in school is only the bare minimum. To be one of the greats requires a great deal of comprehension, but also the ability to hit on such a unique combination of elements that it could not possibly be replicated by anyone else. Fletcher tells Neiman the story of Charlie Parker getting a cymbal thrown at his head, which motivated him. Although in the film this is of course is exaggerated, as films tend to do, to play his best. This is where the term shedding comes from, and jazz improvisation as we know it. The point being, if we don't push ourselves beyond what we think we are capable of, the world will be robbed of our creative gifts. Neiman asks if there's a line, which is the fundamental question of the whole film. Sure, you want to be great, but at what cost? This is where we see the limitations of Fletcher's philosophy. There's a tendency for us to become competitive and to use this as fuel to motivate us towards greatness. And it may even get us there. However, the limit of that is reached. Hopefully an artist will perform from a more spiritual place, which I will reflect upon at the end. So I'm sure to any musician or creative person watching this, you have heard the priceless advice of family or authority figures when it comes to the trajectory of your career, or as I call it, the 2 cents. Although at least with enough pennies, you could eventually get something useful, like a coffee at Starbucks. When Neiman tells his father that he may have missed an opportunity to play in Fletcher's band, his dad says, "You still have options. When you're my age, you have perspective." And this is not uncommon for people to tell their children or young people, because making a living as a creative person is a bitch. It can be very rewarding, but requires the right mix of business and social skills, in addition to the creative skills, hence why it's called the music business. Now in this scene, other family members and their accomplishments are recognized. Whereas with Neiman, it's just drumming, even though he is probably one of the best drummers in the country. I mean, he overcame getting a chair thrown at him and being smacked around. Surge taken from System of a Down had a great delay of dealing with 2 cents from friends and family, the music business, or anyone for that matter, which was to not take it personally, just say, yeah, that's great advice, I'll keep that in mind, and he just did what he wanted anyways.
You know, I never expected to have any type of this type of at least commercial success or embrace from our music. I remember from day one people saying, hey, I work for this major record company, and if I can give you some advice, please don't do this or don't do that, and all this kind of really, really, unexpected stuff that you're like, wow, they're telling me not to do this, you're never going to get signed if you do this or whatever. And I would just say thanks for the advice, and I'd keep on doing whatever I wanted to do. And it worked out, and I'm thankful for that.
Having such focus can also take its toll on romantic relationships as well, as we see with Neiman's relationship with Nicole. Their first date is at a pizza shop that plays jazz, which of course is a mistake because dinner is a terrible first date. Better to do something active. See my documentary, Why is Dating So Difficult, if you are interested in that subject. When he references the songs that are playing, she of course has no clue what the fuck he's talking about. When he stops being an autist, they have a cute little combo for a little bit, but it's clear that she doesn't have the same focus or drive that Neiman does. And this makes her feel insecure. Even from this very first date, we can see how they wouldn't work together as a couple. Neiman wants to be one of the greats and sees his relationship with Nicole as a distraction. When Neiman breaks up with Nicole, he embodies Fletcher's view of reality. He has such laser-like focus that he won't even give any girl the time of day, until out of desperation he calls her back like a simp. This can be a source of contention in many relationships, if you're dating someone who is not as passionate about your creative endeavor. So after all the trials and tribulations, the Jedi mind tricks, the blood, sweat, and tears, getting a chair thrown at his head, Neiman plays the best fucking drum solo in the history of cinema, along with this duck as alternate, of course. This is one of the few times we see Fletcher smile in the whole film. Neiman's performance confirms his spiel in the jazz bar. It is safe to assume that Neiman is now on the road to becoming today's equivalent of a Charlie Parker or a Buddy Rich. Or is he, because he justifies Fletcher's abusive tendencies and Neiman is going to become a heroin addict or blow his brains out? So this isn't to say that the last scene is without its psychological tests. There are a number of obstacles artists experience to performing, stage fright and nerves being one of them. To the musicians performing on stage, they are under a great deal of pressure because this performance can determine the trajectory of their careers. Fletcher ends with the last few tricks of his sleeve. Says he knew it was Neiman just before playing, as well as a tune Neiman is not familiar with. He fucks up, and then to salt the wound, Fletcher goes, "I guess you don't have it." And then his dad comes, presumably to take him home because he's fucked up. However, Neiman goes back on stage, and his playing is not that bad, considering he is not familiar with the material, but it's not in the pocket. It's not breathtaking. However, in live performance settings, especially in jazz, it's expected for musicians to improvise. There's no reason why a drummer as skilled as Neiman couldn't just play the tempo for a few bars and then play a groove that fits the melody. However, Neiman, of course, needs to fuck up in order to build tension and story. It would be boring to watch him just shit 400s of the full film and musically beat Fletcher into submission. Maybe that would be an amusing fan fiction where the roles are reversed. Fletcher says the band is going to wind down on the set list and play something slower, which is essentially publicly calling Neiman a noob. Neiman cuts off Fletcher mid-sentence, playing Caravan, taking over control. Fletcher says he'll gouge his fucking eyes out if he fucks up. However, at this point, Neiman is no longer scared of Fletcher and is standing up to him and mouths "fuck you." Although Neiman wouldn't have had to do this if Fletcher had just kept the exact same playlist or set list as promised earlier. So this is another one of Fletcher's Jedi mind tricks. In the context of the film, it is satisfying to see Neiman stand up to Fletcher. However, in a musical context, imagine a guitar player fucking up the chord changes or the basic melody of the first song, and then shredding over Chick Corea and cueing everyone in. That guitar player would be unplugged within 30 seconds. A huge part of playing live is playing ball and grooving to what everyone else is doing. However, Fletcher is forced to just let them roll with it, because telling them to stop would make the performance look sloppy. At first, Fletcher appears pissed and confused. Over time, however, he is smiling and grooving along. Fletcher even helps get the cymbal back into position. This is the only time where we see Fletcher be encouraging while Neiman is behind the kit. Fletcher smiles at him, one of the few times we see him smiling, and we only see the muscles in his face implying a smile for this scene. We don't even see the full smile. Neiman finishes his mind-blowing solo, and it is implied that he will receive worldly success. But what's not clear is if he will be in the mindset to really enjoy any of it. I've heard the argument that Whiplash should depict the joy of being a jazz musician, considering there are so few films depicting jazz education. However, as a musician, I appreciate this brutal depiction because if one is considering a career in any creative field, they should be prepared for the mind games, the popularity contests, the disappointment of the music business. Idealistic young people need to be prepared to deal with people's shit. And all of that is nothing compared to the challenge of overcoming one's ego. However, when one achieves this and comes out on the other side, there is a great deal of bliss to be experienced. The way we can overcome all of this ego and mental chatter is essentially using our creativity as a meditation practice. Great philosophy I learned this from was none other than my favorite guitarist, Steve Vai, who I got to jam with over the summer. So Vai argues that the way we truly achieve greatness as musicians is not by shredding scales at 300 BPM, although for a time that's certainly fun, but by tapping into the deeper awareness in us, creating from an authentic place.
It's something that happened when I was 22. I was going through a very dark period. I don't know why. It was a deep, deep depression. And I reached a point where I realized I didn't want that in my life. I wanted truth. And I begged and prayed as hard as I could, with all of my heart, to understand truth, to find the real truth, not opinions, not ideologies, not, and that's what I wanted more than anything, more than being a great guitar player, more than being a great musician. All that stuff's peripheral to life, to real life. So there was a slow process, because whatever you want, you get. And whatever you really want, you get. And whatever you really don't want, you get. Because whatever your mind is focusing on, you pull these things into your life.
To answer the fundamental question of this film, is it worth it to pursue a creative career? This, of course, will mean different things to different people. Perhaps finding one's bliss may be more practical, like being a music teacher and showing students how to play in a band or giving guitar lessons. Perhaps one of you may have internet fame or playing in front of crowds. Whatever path we choose to express our creative goals, we must be prepared for the obstacles in our way, both internal and external. Fletcher represents the brutal reality of becoming a great musician, such as jealousy, egotism, artistic arrogance, and mind games that people in positions of power may play. However, if one balances the artistic courage to pursue their vision and the wisdom and strategy to implement it, then yes, having a creative career is certainly worthwhile. I love Whiplash because I have a little bit of Fletcher in me, and I know that you do too. That concludes today's episode on Whiplash. And although it's on music, it's on creativity, it's a little bit of a different subject, but it does have a lot of personal development themes. But I figured it would be a good transition because I am pleased to announce that something I've been working on for the past year, something that is music related in more depth, is I've made a lot of progress on it, and that a few of the modules for a course that I'm working on will be wrapped up for release by the end of the year. So if you are a musician and you want to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of theory or production, this will be completely perfect for you. I'm working on another track because I'm sure if you saw the All I've Got music video, then you will be in for a very pleasant treat for the next projects that I'm working on. Peace, and I hope all is well.